Hello world. It's well documented that George Martin would have preferred the Beatles' White Album to be a single LP, and all the Beatles were opposed to that idea, probably because they'd all written so much and they all wanted to have an equal kind of share of the album, and there were just too many songs that came back from India, and they just didn't want it. I thought, in response to a video that was made by someone called Vinyl Rewind, I'll put a link to his channel down below, who made a video about whether or not he thought it could be a single LP, and he put his tracks together. I will start by saying here that I actually don't believe that it could be so, and what I've done here is I've given smiley faces for how up or down the mood is on the album, because you have to have, in any album, as I've said over and over again, you can't just throw the songs up in the air and then see how they land and just chuck them on an album. There has to be some kind of rhyme and reason as to why the songs are in the order that they're in. I do believe that the Beatles wanted to have some tension between the lower and higher moments, and this is how they organised it. A maximum of 5 smiley faces for an up moment and no smiley faces for a very down moment, okay? So what I've done now is I've taken the song list and turned it round and annotated so you can see like a sort of graph of how this goes. So it starts up, goes bumpy, 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 goes down to absolutely zilch at the end of side 1. Just before we get to Happiness is a Warm Gun, which is the true end of side 1, but so you've got a slight lift before you turn over to side 2. You've got a fairly happy moment here with Martha My Dear, and then it sort of maintains a level until we get to Why Don't We Do It in the Road and I Will, which is Paul's final song on side 2, with a low moment to end side 2, just like we've got a low moment to end side 1, and then it goes up some other to Birthday, which is, you know, full on happy, just the way that side 1 started out, for side 3, which is a new LP as it were, and then we get to George's Long Long Long, which is quite a sort of endearing moment. Revolution 1, then an up moment, and then the whole thing goes plummeting down. Cry Baby Cry, I actually think it's a fairly tense moment, but anyway. And then Revolution 9 goes right down to zilch before ending on a fairly happy moment with Good Night. So taking the songs individually, Back in the USSR is an up moment just because it's rocky, it's punchy, it's quite funny. It was a response to Californian Girls, but turning it on its head completely, so that, you know, this is not America, this is Russia. And, you know, at the time Russia was causing a lot of controversy by invading Czechoslovakia, and you know, the Eastern Bloc was being created, as it were, and a complete piss take, really, I think. And apart from Ringo, who had left by that time, this was one of the songs where he just wasn't involved in making it. It was quite a, you know, an up moment, at least in terms of the fans, how the album started, you know. Yes, there was tension within the group, but yeah. Then it chills out to Dear Prudence, which is a lovely moment, you know. And if you're listening to the original mix, then the whole thing steps back, the whole soundstage steps back, and it's just gorgeous the way that it segues from Back in the USSR down to Dear Prudence and chills out, and the vocals move back, and it's amazing. Glass Onion is, I think, you know, John's fairly cynical, acerbic words to the fans about not reading too much into the songs that they've written, and yeah, I mean, the fans might take that as perhaps a little bit of a telling off, really. Obla Di Obla Da, I've only given that 4 because it's just a little too twee, I think, for me, just a little too twee. Wild Honey Pie is a tension moment, but, you know, they are putting on funny voices in the background, but again, is it really necessary? Do you really want it there? Bungalow Bill, John's response to Gun Control, I think, or John and Yoko's response to Gun Control. It's got Yoko on the album. That's gonna irk some of the more die-hard Beatles fans. While My Guitar Gently Weeps, I've given nothing because it really is very, very low. It's a very tense moment, right from those first piano notes. Ding, 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 ding. You've got the same note, and then all the chords change underneath it. It's actually a note A being repeated over and over again, and it's winding you up. And yeah, it's a very, very tense moment, a very, very bleak outlook on the world from George. Happiness is a Warm Gun, again. I think at the time, there were Snoopy posters that were like "Happiness is," and John took his idea from that. I think I read that somewhere. Yeah, again, Gun Control. It's it's political commentary. Martha, My Dear. If you were going to make a single album, you couldn't have too many twee songs from Paul, and this is again a twee song from Paul. I actually really like it. It's my favourite of all the lighter moments on the album. I love the piano on it. It probably loses an up moment because it doesn't sound like it's a Beatles song. It sounds like it's a Paul McCartney song. I'm So Tired from John. Very tense moment there. Again, depending on who you read, John was over in India with Cynthia, and every day he used to get up really, really early to walk down to the post office to see if there were any letters from Yoko, who he was really in love with there. And so there was this sort of intercontinental extramarital affair going on there. So that's quite a tense moment here because, it's not Cynthia that he's singing about here, it's Yoko. Blackbird, it's Paul's response, I think, to the Black Civil Rights Movement and the words of encouragement to those people that are marching for civil rights. And in 1968, a singer called Janice Ian, who was very popular at the time, had a big hit with a song about an interracial relationship. And as a result of that, some of the more bigoted radio stations blacklisted her. She got death threats and all kinds of bad repercussions from doing this song, booed off stage in some of the southern universities and stuff, and she still carried on playing it. And so I can imagine that there would be a certain section of at least American society here that would be very, very annoyed about this song. So that's why it gets 3. Yeah, it's a beautiful moment on the album though, just Paul with his acoustic guitar and a metronome. But again, it doesn't sound like a Beatles song either. Yeah, that's why it only gets a 3 in an up moment from me. Piggies, again, George with his vegetarian outlook here, that could have caused some consternation from a lot of fans here. Again, George was involved with this Hare Krishna movement, which was no eggs, no meat, no fish. I agree with him, but there would have been people around at the time who didn't. And this, it's controversial. It's preachy in its vegetarianism, and it's a tense moment. Rocky Raccoon, too childish, I think, from Paul. If you were going to have a single LP, this one could go, I think. Don't Pass Me By, again, it's a happy moment from Ringo, but it's still a naff song. It's still not recorded particularly well, hence only a 3-star moment. Why Don't We Do It in the Road? A low moment here, because again, a whole load of fans would be thinking, what? What do we make of this one? I will. 6 smiley faces. I only meant to put 5 there. Sorry, that's a misprint. But yeah, I will. Just a sublime moment from Paul and the rest of the band there. You can tell that, Ringo was playing his sort of toms there, and the couple of guitars there from the others. And yeah, it's Paul's little bass there. He didn't play the bass on that. That's him actually just singing the tune of the bass line there. And it's a lovely moment, I think. Julia, John's song to his mother. It deserves to be a tense moment because it's a beautiful moment. Just because I'm putting one smiley face in here, this is not how good or how bad the songs are. This is how tense you are meant to feel while you are listening to the song. It's a very tense moment here. And also, although the song is to his mother, he's like asking, I've got this other person called Yoko, whose name in English means ocean child, and hence she calls me. So it's like John asking for approval from his mother, or introducing Yoko to his mother, basically, and getting her approval for the relationship. It's an extramarital thing. His marriage was over, to Cynthia at any rate, and it's just a very, very tense moment. And I think the fans would have been feeling that at the time as well, because John and Cynthia, by and large, very popular couple. Yoko was seen as some marriage breaker and was totally vilified by the fans for a very long time. Birthday, just an up fun moment. Your blues. I think John was being silly when he wrote this. I think all of the extra vocals that you can hear in the background was John trying to go through, how miserable could he make the song. And, it is funny in that sense, but it's a black comedy moment there. If you're in the right or the wrong mood, that song can sound, really, really distressing. Mother Nature's Son. I love this song from Paul, really. It's an absolutely beautiful song. It doesn't feel like a Beatles song again, because, it's just Paul, a guitar and a brass band. A bizarre song. I'm wondering whether or not the Me and My Monkey bit is a reference to heroin or something. I think someone said somewhere that that there was some heroin slang going on in there. Listen out though, because there are a couple of places where it sounds like John saying everybody's got something to hide except for me and my Monty. Again, it's a massively long E flat chord with a bass line going underneath it, which is going fast and changing. And then, when we do get to the actual chord changes in there, they don't come from the chords of E flat, so it's a bit of an odd kind of tonality there as well. Sexy Sadie, very low moment, brilliant song. I absolutely adore Sexy Sadie, but it's a very low moment. This is John taking the mickey out of the Maharishi. If you count the syllables of Sexy Sadie, it matches Maharishi exactly, and this is what John had originally written about, but then he kind of changed it because he was a bit worried that the Maharishi would find it. And even though he thought the Maharishi was a fraud, there was still some doubt in him, and he probably thought that if I make this too explicit, he's going to curse me somehow. Helter Skelter from Paul, very low moment again. In terms of the fans, you just had Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour, which were sort of full of hippie trippy, lovely melodic songs and everything, and suddenly Paul's here screaming his head off. And yeah, it does sound, you can imagine that in 1968 this would have sounded very, very controversial, shocking, not really the Beatles, because it doesn't sound like anything that they've done before. And also, at the time, this was the Sharon Tate murders. I think the guy who murdered Sharon Tate, he had this kind of cult with him, and they'd taken acid, and something in this song told them that that's who they had to go and murder. That was also the same with Piggies as well. They listened to Piggies and found messages in there as well. Long, beautiful spiritual moment from George here. Slightly dirgy, but it's a gorgeous song. So for me, it's relief from Sexy Sadie, with its all its cynicism, and Helter Skelter with all its noise and brashness and everything. I think Helter Skelter is absolutely brilliant, but it's not in the sort of Beatles vein. So then Revolution 1, again, as I've said, the world was in turmoil at that time, as the world is now. This was commentary on that turmoil that the world was in, and John wanting to kind of be part of this peacenik movement, but he didn't like the violence that was also going on. But then again, the daring part of him thought, yeah, well, actually, there does deserve to be some sort of violent retribution for, again, the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia, the civil rights movement and everything. And so, don't you know that you can count me out of the violence and destruction, but in as well, because I don't know. By the time that they made the fast version of that, he was definitely out, and it was definitely a peaceful revolution that was needed. But at this point, he couldn't decide whether or not it needed to be a bit more aggressive than that. Honey Pie, Paul being twee, up moment, Savoy Truffle. George, this is it's a weird song, really. On the face of it, it's about a box of chocolates. Eric Clapton had a habit of coming round to him and Patty and just devouring chocolates. And it was written as a kind of warning to his friend, but also a coded message, I believe, to the Beatles and stuff that about karma. In other words, that, you know, we've had all this great stuff, we've had A Hard Day's Night and Sergeant Pepper and whatever, and we've been really popular and everything, but this is like having your teeth pulled out. We all know Oh Blah Dee Blah Da, Happy Ever After in the Marketplace, and so on, but there comes a payback. And it was kind of George's coded warning, I think. Cry Baby Cry and Take Me Back, you know, John wrote this very kind of almost sing a song of sixpence number, Cry Baby Cry, but it's really dark again, black comedy. The chords in there start bashing around towards the end of it. I think it's an absolutely brilliant moment because it's not twee. If Paul had written it, it would be lovely, lovey and fabby, fabby doodah. John has written this very, very dark moment, and even, you know, the voice is put on Nowhere by the Children for a lark, and yeah, it's just absolutely brilliant, but very, very dark. And Take Me Back, Paul's voice with all that reverb on and him singing it is absolutely highest register there, is quite haunting at the end of that. And this kind of preempts how ultimately dark Revolution 9 is going to be, because Revolution 9 obviously caused a huge amount of controversy, very, very tense moment, hence no smiley faces, and it's a majorly mishmash of the tensions that were going on with the band. I've said this umpteen times in various different videos and on comments to other people's videos. You need it because the White Album is a very disparate album, and this is showing exactly how disparate it all is and how it meshes together to form this huge racket. And then Good Night, Don't Have Nightmares, like the end of Crime Watch. I think John wrote this song, and I think by this time, given that only 2 months later, in January 1969, they got together to do the Let It Be sessions, and by that time they were all absolutely fed up with one another. And you can hear in the Let It Be conversations and stuff in the film how, you know, Paul is really worried that John's heart doesn't seem to be in the band anymore, and he'd much prefer to go off with Yoko and everything, and it's worrying him, you know, plus the fact that they're in this studio which didn't work, invented by Magic Alex. And I think that if John could have had his way, the White Album would have been the last Beatles album that there was, you know, and Ringo has to have his moment on a Beatles album, and it's, you know, very beautifully performed. I've heard the demo versions on the new deluxe album. There were different versions of this with guitars and pianos and stuff like that, and the Beatles themselves being the chorus. But the fact that the Beatles are not there, it's just an orchestra, a choir, and Ringo, sets the mood that, you know, perhaps we're not going to be around much longer, folks. So that's my reasoning for why all of these songs have been scored the way that they have been from me. Here is my White Album playlist as a single LP. Already it would have caused a problem because Paul has only got 5 songs of his own as opposed to John's 8, George's 2 and Ringo's 1. But I've tried to preserve the tension levels. So by and large, the order of the album is as the album that we know and love, but with some songs taken out. So I'm trying to preserve the tension levels here. So into your playlists, make the following: Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, Glass Onion, that's as the album originally starts, Jump Into While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Happiness Is a Warm Gun, Martha My Dear, that's the only twee one from Paul I've put in. I didn't want to put Rocky Raccoon in there, and Honey Pie and whatever, because good songs, whatnot, but they just are too twee, I think. Blackbird from Paul, Julia from John, Birthday as a nice sort of kick to start side 2 off, Your Blues, Sexy Sadie, Helter Skelter. So look, we've got very, very tense moments here Can you imagine some of the fans wanting to turn off by that time? Long, long, long from George, so that he's got 2 on there. Revolution 1 and Revolution 9 I would have put as one track and cross-faded it, so that on the demo thing on the deluxe album you'll hear take 18 of Revolution 1, which is not the same as is on the album, but it does go on for a very, very long time, and you can hear parts of Revolution 9 sort of coming in at the end. It goes on as a long jam session, and so I would imagine that there could be this fade up here. You wouldn't have the Can You Take Me Back, because sadly I've had to miss Cry Baby Cry Out just to try and get it to 8 songs aside, and then Goodnight finishing it. There would need to be some editing and some splicing going on. While My Guitar Gently Weeps actually doesn't start with "Hey up," so you would need to put that on. That's actually at the end of the continuing story of Bungalow Bill on the CD at any rate, so I would tack that at the beginning of While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Edit these 2 together, still preserving as much of the length as possible. It will be Revolution 1 that I think would actually deserve a little bit of the knife taken to it. There are bits in there where George's guitar playing is not quite up to scratch. It kind of, the bit John sings, but if you go listening to Chairman Mao, just before that there's a really naff bit of guitar. Some of the da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dums are not together, and so it sets it off kilter. It's not the best performed one. I would have put that under the knife slightly, edited the fade out, and then put in Revolution 9, and maybe that would make it short enough to fit on an album, because as you can see, these 16 songs are 58 minutes in total. That's too long, I think, for an album. I think you could only get about 25 minutes aside. So somehow or other, you'd have to cut 8 minutes from this with some editing, splicing, whatever else. Maybe your blues could be shortened a little bit. But yeah, I'm ranting on now. That's my White Album playlist. Let me know what you think. If you've got any ideas as to how you would put 16 songs onto an album, get it the right length, try and make sure that Paul and John, at least, are not fighting for extra space on the album. Give them a slightly more even score. George has to have 2 songs. He has to have one aside, otherwise he'll be really not, and you can't have a Beatles album without Ringo on it somewhere having his own little star turn. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye bye. How do I stop this darn thing?